Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
They call me Cuban Pete. I'm the king of the rumba beat. When I play the maracas, I go chick chicka boom, chick chicka boom. Yes, sir, I'm Cuban Pete. I'm the grace of my native street. When I start to dance, everything goes chick chicka boom, chick chicka boom. That's senoritas.
On that note, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is Rasco of Rasco's Modern Life. Hello, Rasco.
What up, what up, what up, what up?
Oh, a lot is up, people. Unfortunately, Steve couldn't be here tonight. He had a emergency he had to deal with, but that's okay. We understand. But Rasco, what are we reviewing tonight?
The Moosk.
The Moosk?
The Moose.
Is that like the spin-off of this, where the mask gets onto a moose?
Yes.
Like the Canadian version of this movie?
Yes. There's a culture, there's like a big cultural barrier, and they just didn't think that it would translate well in Canada, so they just made their own version of it.
Yeah, I can totally see that, because, I mean, you got to think about it. The population of Canada is like 10% human, 90% moose, so...
Yeah.
That's totally legit. They got different demographics they have to appeal to. So we're here tonight to review The Moosk, which, you know, for a movie that I don't think I would relate to, I feel does a pretty good job of you know, kind of crossing that cultural border.
Yeah. It really is a unifying experience, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anyway, in reality, we're reviewing The Mask, the 1994 Jim Carrey classic. This is one of those weird movies where, like, I was watching it with Haley, and she sees Dark Horse Comics come up in the credits, and she goes, wait, this was a comic book?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize this was a comic book movie, myself included, for quite a while. I didn't find that out until, like, after I got into comics. And it's, like, one of the best comic book movies in a weird way, even though it has very little to do with its source material. I think it's one of those things that is actively better than its source material. It's hard to say that because they're such different things, but still. I don't know, Rasco. What are your thoughts on The Mask?
This is like one of those movies that I just like, I don't remember a time in my life where I hadn't seen this movie.
Oh, yep.
It's just like The Mask. Everyone knows The Mask. Jim Carrey's in it. It was just like this thing, like from. It's like one of those things where you can't pinpoint the time in your life where you first watched it. You just kind of grew up knowing that it was a thing, and it's really weird because I've actually seen the sequel to this movie like probably over 60 times, like Son of the Mask.
Oh God, fuck that movie.
It's really bad, but I've actually seen that movie more than this.
You know, it's so weird. We're definitely gonna have to talk about Son of the Mask a little bit too, but yeah, I kind of agree with you. I would have been like either 3 or 4 when this movie came out, depending on the month, and I don't remember not having seen it. It's just always been this thing for me, and like this is kind of the best of the 90s Jim Carrey movies in my mind. Because you had, like, this, Liar, Liar, Dumb and Dumber. There's, you know, that whole slew of movies where he was, like, really taking off. And he kept playing a lot of the same character, like, overall kind of the same guy. But this was the one that I think is just absolutely the most fun to watch. Probably be this and then Ace Ventura. Interesting little factoid for you, Rasco. Did you know that The Mask had an animated series?
I think I did. Like, I can't. Well, like, it's one of those.
Well,
things
hold on. I'm getting to a larger point. Did you know The Mask had an animated series? And also, did you know that Ace Ventura had an animated series?
No.
And also, Did you know those two animated series got a crossover episode?
No.
Yeah, it's really neat, the kind of stuff that happened because of this, Jim Carrey's popularity in the 90s. And it's weird because The Mask is like this live action thing that's really referential to cartoons, and so they made it a cartoon show. And it's got a kick-ass theme song, let me tell you that. I love the theme song from the cartoon show. Perfectly describes the character. Anyway. But yeah, it's this really just... This is the top for me of the 90s Jim Carrey movies. How about you?
I think it's probably the best, for sure.
Yeah?
I would... Yeah. I'm actually, like... It's really weird, because I'm actually not, like, a huge, like, Jim Carrey fan. Not that, like, I don't like Jim Carrey. It's just that I don't, like, seek out Jim Carrey movies, and I've probably only seen, like, I've seen... Each of the 90s Jim Carrey movies once besides this, which I've seen like upwards of like 10 times probably.
For me, I grew up watching this and Liar Liar and Ace Ventura, and like, I probably watched Liar Liar more. I've probably quoted Ace Ventura more. I mean, when he talks out of his butt, how can you not? But this one was just the absolute best for me. Like, not as a kid, but in retrospect, I think it is just absolutely the best because, he gets to do so much of what he's good at and get so much variety, and it doesn't feel like just dumb, stupid jokes. It actually fits with what the purpose behind the story and stuff is. And it actually fits the visual aesthetic perfectly. I cannot imagine a Mask movie without Jim Carrey, and neither could the people who made Son of the Mask, which is why that movie is so bad.
Yeah, like, it's weird because, like, it's mainly just because, like, I don't know if there's another comedic actor that really does the same thing that Jim Carrey does.
Maybe Robin Williams, but that's really a stretch.
Yeah, but, like, even then, like, I would say, like, even then, Robin Williams, it's a little bit of a different thing that he's got going on. But, like, this is, like, Jim Carrey is always just kind of, like, just over-animated all the time. And so that, like, just this movie was kind of made for him.
Mm-hmm. And, like, it's funny to listen to the director talk about this movie because he's like, Jim Carrey saved me about $1 million in CGI with just all the weird stuff he could do with his face.
Yeah.
And that's, like, he's got this just really, really expressive face. It's like it's made out of rubber and he can just shape it into anything he wants. And so that just works so well with all the cartoony expressions and stuff that the Mask pulls off. And again, I do not honestly feel like it could have made that work in anything if it had been any other actor. Much less a Jamie Kennedy, who's just like not on any level able to emote or be ridiculous. Like, Jamie Kennedy, I don't think he's very funny to begin with, but what he is good at with his humor is just being kind of distant and goofy. Like, he's kind of like a good, what, huh, man, kind of stoner comic. Mm-hmm. He has not got, like, a fraction of the energy Jim Carrey does.
Yeah, and the other thing about Jim Carrey is that, like, he'll randomly choose to, like, pull things back and be, like, subtle sometimes. Like, randomly when I rewatched this movie for this, like, I was like, the part that made me laugh the most during the entire movie, and this is, like, really weird. It was just, like, this thing for some reason. I just thought it was so funny when he's, like, in the beginning of the movie, when he's, like, opening all the drawers at his desk, when Cameron Diaz is, like, comes into the bank and they're, like, talking, and he, like, he's, like, opening all the drawers, and then one drawer in the middle won't close, and so he's just, like, trying to shove it, and then he just, like, smashes it with his elbow and pushes it in, and for some reason, I thought that was so funny, and I don't know why, but it was just the way he played it. It was just, he kept such a straight face the entire time. It was just really funny.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the one for me that really worked is when he's in the really shitty car, and it breaks down on the bridge, and he, like, slams his head into the steering wheel, and then goes, ow. That really works for me. Because, like, I don't know, I've done that. I've been, like, mad about something in my car and, like, hit the steering wheel a bunch of times, and then went, fuck, because steering wheels are hard. And my hand hurt. And like on my Mustang, when I had my Mustang, I got really pissed off one time and just punched the center console of the steering wheel. And from then on, there was a little light that said airbag on my dashboard. And I always had to deal with that until my dad took a piece of black electrical tape and put it over the glass so you couldn't see that it said airbag. So, luckily I was never in an accident where an airbag needed to deploy. I don't know. I probably fucked up the airbag.
Yeah. Might just like randomly pop out when you're driving down a highway.
My friend David and I talked about that one time. Like, what? Like, he seriously noticed that it said airbag. He's like, so what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. It probably means the airbag's fucked up and it could, I don't know, maybe deploy or some shit. He's like, what if we're just driving? What are you gonna do? Like, David, take the wheel!
Well, you will be safe because you'll have the airbag.
That's true. There you go. Oh, man. Reminds me of Jay and Silent Bob in Clerks 2. It's like, officer arrested us for suspicion of mischief. The fuck's suspicion of mischief? We were driving around with a deployed airbag. Regardless of all that, though. So yeah, I agree. There's a lot of like really just the way he just is able to act so restrained and dorky is hilariously adorable.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes just for so much fun to watch him.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start getting into some of the more than just the mask itself. I guess the thing that always gets me when I watch clips from this movie or just rewatch it is this is so much more adult in places than I ever realized growing up.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Like, there are so many things where, you know, he's making the balloon animals and he pulls out a condom and he goes, oops, wrong pocket.
Yeah, that was the big one. I was like, oh, I forgot about that.
And, like, not even that, but, like, the guys in the mechanic shop,
Yeah.
when they're like, oh, we gotta get a proctologist. Like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That's pretty dark.
Yeah. And when he's in the park and he's like coming on to Cameron Diaz and he's like, oh, de malheur in your soup, or like something like that. And I'm like, what the hell? This is really
Right?
creepy.
Yeah, yeah. And, like, I guess it's at those moments where it's kind of the most like the comic. Because
Yeah.
the thing with the Mask comic book, and I've only read a couple issues, but what happens in that is, like, people put on the mask and just become sociopaths and, like, serial killers. They'll kill people in really over-the-top cartoony ways because of the supernatural powers of the mask, but they'll still just straight up murder people. And so it's like, it's in moments like that where he gets, like, really, really forceful or like, really kind of scary when he, like, you know, fucks the guys with the mufflers. There's sodomizes, there's the proper term. That, like, you really see the darker edges of the comic start to show. But, I don't know, like, even... I can't say that that's a problem because as a kid watching it, I didn't pick up on that stuff.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I think it's just that it's delivered in such a way. One, it's really quick. It's like blink and you miss it. But I think it's just delivered in such a way that you have to actively know what they're talking about to get any level of what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And because they do it so fast, it's just impossible for a kid to catch on based on the context.
Mm-hmm.
That's at least my thought, because, yeah, I never noticed that stuff growing up.
Yeah, I never noticed any of that either, and it's just one of those things where that's what's fun about, you know, I actually kind of like that in movies where you kind of get two different experiences. Like, you can rewatch the movie a second time through a different lens just with age, and it's almost like you get to just rewatch the movie again for the first time almost.
Yeah, totally.
Especially when there's like a gap between the last time you've seen it.
Yeah, I remember so little of this, honestly. It's weird to say that, because I don't. I remember the basic plot. I remember, okay, so Stanley Ipkiss gets the mask and does some bad stuff, and is getting chased by the cops, and there's some gangsters, and they get the mask, and then at the end of the day, he has to defeat the gangsters, get the mask back. But, like, that's not really... I don't really remember the plot or the scenario when I think back on this movie, before this watch. I remember all the one-liners. I remember smoking, and that's the spicy meatball. Like, that's the part that stuck with me as a kid because it was just so genuinely entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And that is weird that you can go back to a movie and, like, it feels like you didn't even watch it because now it all feels so blatantly obvious to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so strange when you have that experience of a movie that you don't that you feel like you remember, but then you watch and you don't even realize how much you missed.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other movies that I have that with. I don't know. You got anything?
You'll know it when you think of it. It's like one of those things where you go, yeah, there are multiple movies like that, and then you can't list any examples, but you know for a fact that there are other movies like that.
I'm certain. And I guess just a problem of not going back and rewatching the movies since then, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like Men in Black might be one of those movies.
Oh, I bet. Because I remember the Elvis line in retrospect, but I remember someone had to explain that to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. It's a unique experience. But since I described the overall story, what did you think of the story of this movie? Do you think it, like, actively works and all fits together fairly well?
It works for the most part. One of the things I forgot about this movie is how not normal the world is. Like, it's very much kind of like a heightened universe. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more comic booky feeling, and that's one of those things where when you watch it as a kid, again, it's like I watch it now and I'm like, oh, this isn't anything like the regular world, and that in some ways kind of makes it, it lessens all of the problems that I have with this movie, which mainly just come down to the people in the world don't react the same. Like, they don't react how I would expect them to react to all of the, like, crazy cartoony stuff that he does as the Mask.
Yeah, you think, like, the tornado running around the room, it might be more like, oh no, he's really fast. It'd be like, no, that is legit a superpower.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. And, like,
I want to see the Christopher Nolan version of the Mask where they talk about how much this changes the world.
Yeah. And, like, when the cops are watching the security footage of the bank, mm-hmm. and they're like, wow, that guy moves really fast. I'm like, okay, but he's also, like, moving so fast you can see the wind coming off of him. Like, that's pretty, like, is that really how you're going to react to it? Like, oh, he's really fast. And I guess that's kind of lessened by the comic book nature of the world. But still, I think people react to that the same way that people react to superheroes in comic books. Well, when, like, a superhero jumps onto the scene where it's not something that's normal even for them, mm-hmm. It's somewhat more believable in that universe. But it's like that's where the most problems arise with this movie. It's kind of like one of those movies that falls into the category of a lot of the better M. Night Shyamalan movies, which I always call them like 95% premises, where it works like 95%, and if you, like, really try to piece, like, when you really put a magnifying glass to it, things like that are just kind of weird. But I mean, it doesn't, like, ruin the movie or anything. It's just, that's the biggest problem I have with the movie, is just, like, how everyone sees him and they're just, like, kind of normalized to the Mask and his behavior. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest problem with the movie isn't even that. It's just, like, a really weird kind of plot contrivance. And that's, I don't understand why, what's the character's name? The Carmen Diaz's character. Cameron Diaz. Carmen Diaz, what the fuck?
I don't know.
Cameron Diaz, that's the thing, she doesn't really have much character. But that's a separate problem. Like, her character, I don't understand why she comes back to the bank after, after the night at the club and stuff. Mm-hmm. There seems like no real reason for that, for her motivation. Like, why would she go to Stanley looking for the Mask? I don't get why those are connected in her mind at all.
Yeah, it's like one of those things like Mary Jane and Spider-Man 2, where it's like it kind of seems like she knows that he's the mask, but she doesn't want to say it, and she's kind of like willingly pretending she doesn't know.
Maybe I think that's giving it too much credit, because like the in-scene explanation is she tells Stanley that she's not going to be able to open up a bank account, but like, really? That I don't buy that motivation for that's the real reason she showed up. Mm-hmm. Like, it seems like it does have something to do with the mask. That's why she showed up. But at the same time, it's like, well, why did she think Stanley with the mask? I don't get that at all. It's weird that this is her first big movie.
Yeah, it is.
Like, it says introducing Cameron Diaz in the intro credits and stuff. It's kind of strange to think that, like, you know, a relatively unknown actress broke onto the scene with such a gigantic film.
Yeah. And it's also weird, just period, that this was such a big movie, because I just don't feel like we would put this much effort into this kind of film if, like, this movie didn't exist and we were making The Mask today. Actually, that's not quite true, because it's based off of a comic book, so maybe we would put this much effort into it now, but go back to, like, maybe 2005 or maybe 2007, and this isn't like, you wouldn't get this good of a Mask movie, I think.
I tend to agree. Like, this was one of those, like, pre-comic book movie renaissance comic book movies that was, like, really good. You know, there's, like, you got Superman, the first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve. You can debate about Superman 2. Then you've got, like, I'll give it to Batman 89 just because. And then this, I'm trying to think of other ones, like, before I kind of mark Batman Begins as the beginning of the comic book renaissance. So between 94 and now, like, really, really high quality comic book movie productions, I guess the first two X-Men and the first two Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Like, so you only have a couple of, like, really, really high quality ones in there. And I'm sure someone's going to yell at me for not naming one they really liked. Like, I'm not saying that those were the only ones that are worth anyone's time. I'm saying that, like, those are the only ones that are, like, truly great quality films. Everything else is pretty much, yeah, it's alright. It's okay. At best, usually. And then you have Batman and Robin, which is awful.
Awfully good.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Let's go with that one. Anyway. No, just, there's a lot of stuff like that where I'm like, that doesn't really seem like a thing that like, I agree with you. It doesn't seem like many studios would do this, particularly because, like, okay, all the other comic book movies I named are really big characters in the comics. And we started out talking about this. No one fucking knows The Mask is a comic book.
Yeah.
So, like, this much effort and love was put into a thing that didn't have any name recognition to begin with. That's weird.
And is it, like, it almost seems like the fact that no one knew what The Mask was actually a benefit. Like, it actually may have benefited the movie, because maybe at the time they would have thought, if people know this is based off a comic book, they won't like it. And so, like, maybe they thought that was the reason why it made sense to capitalize on this.
Maybe. It's weird, like, because it doesn't try to hide that it's got really comic booky influence, right?
Yeah.
It's got just such a feel and an atmosphere. It very much feels like, you know, a comic book movie. There's no getting around that. Shit, Zack Snyder probably, you know, was one of the, like, this like, very informative of his style, like, the way that opening sequence is shot. That's just a lot of that, like, especially when you see Edge City, the big panorama, that's like a very Zack Snyder-y kind of shot, where it's, like, very color-toned. For the 90s. This was 90s, mind you. It's very, very intentionally playing with the color palette. like, that was just before that technology became really, publicly usable. Like, really, really highly usable, let me say. So, like, that's a very Zack Snyder-y thing, to do really, really, what's the word I want here? Stylized shot like that.
Yeah.
And you don't see that a lot outside of comic book movies, I mean.
Yeah, especially like the weird, like, smoggy half, like where you can see all like the weird smog in the sky and things like that.
Yeah, totally. And like they bring it back when you have the like, it doesn't make any sense, but it's just a cool visual, is when you have the Aurora Borealis appearing above Edge City because they're in Landfill Park. And again, that's a very comic booky thing, that someone could turn a landfill into a park.
Yeah,
that's hilarious. Who would ever go there?
Everybody.
Yeah. You'd go visit. That's your prime date location.
Yeah.
That's your panty drop remove. Take her to Landfill Park.
God.
Oh man, we were discussing at work. We were discussing the song "I'm in Love with Your Body," and in that song, he has a lyric where he's like, "You and I are thrifty, so we went to a Chinese buffet for lunch on our first date." I'm like, that's your panty dropper right there. Chinese buffet for lunch. And you're bringing bags and tinfoil so you can take food with you. That's your I'm prime real estate move right there. Anyway. But yeah, like, there's a lot of care put into the way that this is shot and handled, and just, this is one of the first really, really heavy CG films too.
Yeah,
which is interesting,
especially for like a comedy.
Definitely.
That's what makes it really interesting, is that it's like you just don't. That's like another thing where we're now in a place where we have just kind of like this subpar CG that we put in comedies now, where it's required. So like, for example, I saw like I haven't seen this movie, but the new Baywatch trailer, where like the trailer for that movie, you see like fire and like there's like a yacht or something on fire, and like The Rock is like saving people out of this boat, and it's like, it doesn't look bad, but it's like definitely not the same level that you see with like CG fire in like movies where they're very effects heavy, like big blockbuster like action movies and stuff like that. And it's like, this is different though, because this is kind of like, if you were using CG, you weren't trying to use like shitty CG at this time. Like, you were going all the way with it in a way, you know?
Yeah, this is when the CG artists were really proving their merit to the effects community, because they were really getting shit on a lot. And that of course happens still, but like, the idea that the CG effects just were nowhere near as good or didn't count, that was a lot of the early attitude in Hollywood in the late 80s through the 90s, early 2000s. Is that the CG just did not look good, or wasn't like part of the real art form, or whatever the hell kind of bullshit they want to make up. And like, I remember there were, say what you will about Jar Jar Binks, but for the time he looks pretty good. And there's like a scene where Jar Jar is on screen next to a practical effect alien, and the practical effects, by any realistic standards, are pretty not good. Like, they're passable, but that's just it, passable. When like Jar Jar is sitting there and he's fully competent on every level, everything about him looks fine, but like the artists that worked on that scene talked about it, and like every single facial expression and fold of clothing was scrutinized with Jar Jar, but the practical effects were allowed to just slide under the line. So it's interesting that kind of attitude was taken with digital effects so early on. And this movie does a great job of integrating them, and the biggest problem with the integration of the digital effects are the actors not knowing how to play off of them.
That's interesting. Like, that can still be a problem now, but like at this time, there's not many reference points.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's this, like, you know, you can usually get a laugh out of people holding a ball of air or whatever when they're in a movie, and they have to interact with a CGI character. And it's like, it's kind of funny because I was watching some behind the scenes footage for Game of Thrones on how they were integrating the dragons, and they do a really cool shot of Daenerys, like, stroking one of her dragons, like, petting it.
Yeah.
And then they, like, do the wipe, and she's just, like, stroking a tennis ball. Yeah. And it looks so silly. Like, I don't know how... You have to respect actors that can pull off acting in CG environments so well, because that just is ridiculous. Like, I saw this other one of it was from the new Beauty and the Beast live action movie.
Oh, I've seen this too, yeah.
Yeah, where Emma Watson's walking downstairs with the actor playing the Beast, and he's just like in this mocap suit, and he's got these weird things on his feet to make him artificially taller, and she's got like a straight face. That would be so hard because he just looks silly. But like in this movie, in The Mask, there's moments that the effects happen and the actors are trying their best, but just you can tell that there's nothing there based on how they're all like not quite looking at the same thing. So like when Gideon puts on the mask for the first time, like that dark cloud forms above his head, and the cloud looks really cool, gorgeous even with all the lightning and stuff. But, like, everybody is looking up at the cloud, but they're all looking in slightly different directions.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have one centralized point, because, you know, you didn't think about that. It's like, it's not like you actively need something on set for the animators to know what to do. They know where the cloud's going to need to go when they get the footage. So the director's like, okay, just look up and imagine that there's a cloud there. And so they're all looking at slightly different spots in just the same general direction.
Yeah.
And so like that's weird. And like even Jim Carrey, who does the most with the CG, even he has trouble selling it, because like when Milo runs up to him and with the mask on and tries to lick him with like the really long tongue, you know, he definitely acts like, okay, I'm getting licked by a dog and I don't want to, but just the way his face moves isn't quite right, and like he gets too far away, and the animators don't quite meet the tongue with the face. It just, like, you can tell this was before they puppeteered something in, I'd say. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know that for a fact. I don't want to sound like I watched behind the scenes for this movie. I'm just saying that's usually not a problem you would have if they actively put something in the scene for him to play off of. And I just don't feel like they did.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird, like, the CG in general in this movie, I feel like this is a thing that I don't, okay, so the CG, obviously, like, when you look at it, you can tell that, like, it's dated, but it's one of those things where it's like Jurassic Park, where you look at it, and for some reason, it just feels like the rest of the movie looks the same amount of dated, so, like, it works. Whereas, like, sometimes I see movies now that, like, I feel like already in 3 years I look back on it and it looks dated. And that's not every movie that uses CG today, but that's, like, sometimes in movies I notice that. Whereas, like, even this, like, when you look at, like, some of the textures on, like, the, like, really, really animated stuff, when Jim Carrey's face is like a dog and, like, the tongue rolls out and everything, like, it looks dated, but it looks no more dated than the rest of the movie, if that makes sense.
See, for me, I think the effects work here because they just so fit the aesthetic. They're not going for, like, quote-unquote realistic-looking items. Everything he's doing cartoon style, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, the only effect that doesn't look really that doesn't quite look good because it doesn't match the tone is when Gideon spits the bullets back out, because they still look like cartoon bullets. But he's not the cartoon guy, so that doesn't make as much sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like within the wider context of the movie, that one thing doesn't really stand out. But like everything Jim Carrey makes and does with the mask that's in CG, like I'm thinking particularly when he pulls out the gigantic guns,
Yeah.
They don't try to make the CG guns look like actual guns.
No, yeah,
they
that's
make them
definitely
look
true.
like Looney Tune things. So just like the textures and everything, they make it look like kind of a half step between realistic and super cartoony, and it just works. It just fits the scene because it's meant to look kind of unnatural compared to everything else in the world. So I think that's why the CG really works here. As far as the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park go, here's the bombshell. Here's my hot take. You ready, Rasco?
Oh, snap.
The CG in Jurassic Park usually actually doesn't look very good. It is entirely nostalgic glasses for a lot of the CG shots in Jurassic Park. It's amazing. Like, some of them do look pretty damn good, and a lot of that has to do with the time of day, the fact they shot it at night, and they made sure to like really get it on their beauty shots. But like, some of the raptors look really bad. Some of the what do they call them? Brontosauruses, long necks. Those things I think look pretty awful at times. But yeah, I think it's just about nostalgic glasses with a lot of early CG movies that people always point back to.
People are gonna attack you, Ian.
I mean, probably. Let them come, let them eat me whole, and let them choke.
Yeah.
Hashtag Renato Jones. Anyway, what else? Because I do feel that for as CG heavy as this movie is, it really does hold up, which is impressive because it's now over 20 years old.
Damn.
Yeah, this movie is old enough to drink. If someone was born the day this movie came out, they are not only old enough to drink, they have been old enough to drink for quite a while.
Damn.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Weird. It is weird.
Yep. Anyway. Alright, so characters. Let's talk about characters then. We kind of mentioned it, but I don't feel that Cameron Diaz's character has a character, mainly because I literally cannot think of her name.
I can't either. I don't know what her name is.
Like, I really do not feel she has any actual character or motivation. She's kind of just the good girl caught in the middle of everything.
Yeah.
I do like what they, like, the function she serves in the plot, I do think is interesting because, like, it would have been really easy to have this movie be, okay, she's the girl of his quote-unquote dreams, but she's wrapped up in the mob and she's only out for herself. And like they say in the beginning of the movie, oh, she's just always looking for the next best thing. So it would have been really easy to have Stanley's character arc be learning that he doesn't need to go after what he thinks is perfect for him. He needs to like go for someone that is actually good for him and for him to end up with a reporter character. And I do think it was an interesting plot twist to have the reporter character who says, oh, I'm just looking for a nice guy, be the one that stabs him in the back, and to have Cameron Diaz's character actively be, someone who's genuinely interested and wants him to be safe and actually be with him.
Yeah.
It's just, she doesn't get enough motivation on her own.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it's like what they didn't do is kind of like a trope that I notice in a lot of, I think in general, just a lot of comedies that I have seen throughout the years, but like post 2000 comedies, I feel like that is just a thing that is in so many movies where the guy likes the girl that's it's kind of like textbook hot, but then there's this other girl that he is actually more compatible with, and he winds up with her in the end. And I feel like it's weird because at this time, I don't think that would have been too much of a been there, done that trope kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But they didn't do it. They did the thing that is like less tropey, but at this time wasn't really less tropey because it wasn't like a trope yet. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, certainly, and it just works better. It having that twist really does surprise. just based on the way they set it up, because Cameron Diaz's character is working with the mafia and all these things.
Yeah.
Whereas this other one, it's a reporter, and we're supposed to believe, that she's looking to do the right thing in the world or whatever, and then to just reverse that in the end, I feel it's interesting on a plot level. I think I'm not going to really say the reporter doesn't have much of a character, because she is more directly a plot device.
Yeah.
And that's not a problem because she's not a main character. She's a minor character. I think Cameron Diaz I don't know anything about her, really, and that's a problem.
Yeah, she potentially has, like, the Sandman issue from Spider-Man 3 where he's like, my daughter's sick, I'm gonna rob people. And it's kind of like, well, you could convince me that you're sympathetic. It's just that, like, we don't know what else he's tried. Like, he could have just, like, never even tried to get a job and just went straight to crime. And, like, this kind of has that problem where it's like, she might be a really bad person, like, just going along with all of this. Like, we don't really know enough about her history.
Well, like, we get a quick mention that, she's got a lot of talent and she wants to be a star. And so she's, like, ended up with Gideon on that path or something. I don't know, just, like, it would have been nice to get some kind of scene where she explains her past. Especially because we have that moment when her and Stanley are watching the sunset at Landfill Park before he loses his nerve and runs away to go hide into the mask. Brilliant character moment for Stanley, by the way. Yeah. But, like, in that moment, that would have been a really good opportunity to give us more on her character and her background and what she is doing. Like, if Stanley said something to the effect of, I can tell you're really into, powerful guys, that's why you like the mask, that's why you're with Gideon. And she's like, it's not powerful guys, it's what they can do for me. I do blah, 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 blah to get up in the world because you just got to climb that ladder and this is the only way I know how, or whatever. Yeah. And really what I want is someone who's who I don't have to manipulate, someone who I can just trust. If we just got something like that, that would have really worked as to why she is actively attracted to Stanley but thinks the mask will take her places.
Yeah, and, like, that actually is, like, the perfect scene to do that in.
Yeah, and it's just, I could almost see that as a deleted scene, right?
Yeah.
And so there's not enough there for just her. And, I mean, it's a problem with the movie. How much of a problem really depends on just my mood. Because I'm like, I don't know, I've never thought about that till this viewing. But I've also never really been critical of this movie before. It's always just been there, right?
Yeah. It's one of those movies that has, like, this definite level of, like, above just competence in a way that, like, you're willing to not scrutinize the movie because the movie's not trying to, like, trick you into thinking you're having a good time. Like, there's actually and I don't want to use the term, like, baseline level of competence because it's above that. But, like, just, like, here's an example. It's just, like, this little bit of you're doing two things at once in one scene that you just don't see in a lot of really low-effort comedies today, where the opening scene where she goes into the bank and you're sitting there and you're like, she's really coming on to him, and it's kind of weird. And also, why did she specifically diss the first guy that greeted her to go sit with Stanley? And then it's revealed, she has a camera in her bag, right? That isn't very, like, that doesn't seem like that much of a, whoa, you're really thinking there, screenwriters. But that is so just effective at getting a lot done in one scene.
It's efficient storytelling.
Yeah, compared to, like, stuff now where, like, if this movie was made today, maybe depending on who's behind the wheel, I could totally see that scene just being like she very strangely comes on to him, and then, like, nothing really. There's no, like, secondary purpose to that interaction as much, like, you know what I mean? Like, the camera reveal adds a secondary purpose to that interaction. Mm-hmm. I could imagine this being made today where that scene is just she's weirdly there and Stanley is awkward in front of her just to introduce the characters. Whereas they take that opportunity to then go right into the next scene and introduce that there's this whole, like, criminal element immediately.
Yeah, totally. And that just really helps with the thing. it's really effectively, it's an effectively told story. I don't know how well it deals with characters outside of Stanley. I feel like Stanley is the only one who gets a character arc here.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I don't know if I'd say that. I'd say Stanley and Gideon are the only ones who get character arcs here.
Okay.
Gideon gets, because they're both given that opportunity to change, and Stanley ultimately takes it, Gideon does not. But otherwise, everyone else is a pretty minor character, except for Carmen Diaz's character. Cameron, I keep saying Carmen, goddamn. Cameron Diaz's Caramel Diaz. It's the new dessert. Except for Cameron Diaz's character, she is definitely not a minor character, but she is just there to serve the plot and to further Stanley's character arc.
Yeah, that's pretty true.
And what's weird is Stanley keeps getting told he's a nice guy, but how to put this? It's weird that we get more motivation for the reporter that ultimately betrays him than we do for Cameron Diaz's character.
Yeah. Definitely.
So I actively think she is the biggest problem with this movie. But it's in such you really have to consider everything about the movie to get there. And even then, when you just accept it's not her story, it's Stanley's, it kind of becomes less of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a problem. It's still going to lose some ground for me because of that. But ultimately, I just think the argument is they weren't thinking of that.
Yeah. And to some degree, it's one of those movies where it kind of feels like the world revolves around Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
And in kind of like a cartoonish manner, so it kind of lessens the blow of those things. In a more straight-faced movie where the world's pretty much our world, but he's still the mask. These would be bigger problems than this kind of movie where it kind of does feel like the world. It's him versus the world in a lot of ways. Specifically the scene where he's trying to get into the club. And his friend just kind of walks in with those other girls, and then the bouncers are like, nope, and they throw him in the mud. It just kind of feels like the world that he's in is against him. And that's
the basics of comedy, right? Where part of what makes comedy is your character is doing everything right and just nothing's working out for him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely, that describes Stanley Ipkiss to a T. He's got a good job. He's, doing everything. He treats his character trait is that he is too nice, and literally all he gets back for it is pain. That's hilarious. When the bouncers are throwing him out, what does he resort to as a threat? I will never come back here unless you put me down right now. You're about to lose a customer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what makes him such an interesting character, is he is the typical nice guy. Here, in a different universe, it's Stanley Ipkiss that goes crazy and starts seeing Tyler Durden.
Yeah.
It's that kind of just overly nice guy who's being taken advantage of by the world. And so he kind of gets his own Tyler Durden in The Mask, but The Mask is this attractive thing where it allows him to break his inhibitions and just be whatever he wants to be, do whatever he wants to do. And I really think the most effective scene for his character is at the landfill park. Not only because of the Cuban Pete song and dance number, which is my favorite in the movie, but because he has that moment where he doesn't have the confidence to speak to Cameron Diaz as himself and spend time with her as himself. I love the scene with Ben Stein before that sets this up, but he doesn't have the confidence to do it as himself, so he uses the mask as a crutch, and by doing so, all he does is freak her out.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that not being a nice person, that just being someone who is only interested in what he wants, and what he wants is sex, is the thing that pushes her away and makes her not like him. That's really cool. Because, you know, after that, she just knows that he's the mask.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's able to balance an attraction to him. But clearly in that scene, she is not attracted to the mask anymore.
Yeah.
And it's because she spent time with Stanley. I really like that.
Yeah. It's also kind of cool to go back to the beginning of the movie, and it's not like you slowly get to see him like be more honest with himself as things continuously go wrong. Because like the beginning of this section of this movie is kind of just like, he starts off, hey, got these tickets, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess you can go to the concert or whatever with your friend. And then, like, he's kind of lying to himself, like, I think what I did was a very nice thing. I think that was a good thing to do. And then we get to, like, his car is not going to be fixed. And he's like, okay, well, I get this other terrible piece of shit car. And then even when he arrives at the club, he gets out and he's like, she's a classic. It's just like he's still, like, to some degree trying to put on this face of, like, it's not that bad. But then after that, when the car, like, breaks down on the bridge, it's like he doesn't even pretend that everything isn't going to shit. He's just like, you know what? I'm going to be honest with myself. This sucks ass.
Yeah, he is literally at rock bottom in that moment. And it's weird because my initial feeling was, and I never thought about this movie critically before, it's a really slow start to a movie, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, once he puts on the mask, it gets up really quick. And I love how there's just no exposition. He puts on the mask, and right away he is a fucking cartoon character.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. But, like, that's a good 20, 30 minutes into the film. It takes a while to get there. And, like, that's really impressive. That they're able to pull that off and do as much character motivation and set up for the character arc in that time as they do, as well as setting up the rest of the plot of the film.
Yeah, and I mean,
and the conflict.
That's what to me at least makes me have to have like a certain level of respect for this movie, just because it is actually setting up a character that's going to go on an arc in a way that is it's just so much more thoughtful than so many comedies that I see today. It's like they actually took a good amount of real estate in this movie and allocated it to just setting up things so you get a very clear picture of the starting point, and so that by the end you can very easily connect that arc. And it's like, thank you, movie, thank you. I just really appreciate that about this movie.
Yeah, totally. And what impresses me the most about it is, like, you know, it's definitely not by any stretch of your imagination the funniest section of the movie, but it's not laughless in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But they make sure not to have anything be so funny in the beginning that it like makes other scenes not as interesting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, you get a couple giggles, but you're able to actually follow the plot. You're not laughing so hard that they can't progress the plot at all. You're just gonna like, he's stupid and can't get the drawer to close. Moments here and there, like, he got thrown in the gutter, his car broke down. It's like just quick little like ha-has. And then once he becomes the cartoon character, it's just balls to the wall insane. Like, there's so many gags the second he puts on the mask, and it's awesome. Like, you know, in that stretch between him putting on the mask and him arriving at the club, there are so many funny moments that I could create a list. I could do a top 10 list of the funniest moments in the first 5 minutes that he wears the mask. And that's really, really good comedy writing.
Yeah.
And a lot of it it's not all writing, a lot of it has to do with Jim Carrey's performance.
Yeah, and he hits there's certain things where I feel like one of my favorite moments in the beginning of the movie is when she's talking about, Cameron Diaz is talking about his tie. Mm-hmm. And he just has that line about how, like, oh, it's like a power tie. It's like supposed to make you feel powerful. Something about that makes you really, like, at least with me, I kind of look at that, I'm like, I kind of like, oh, that's kind of sad. Like, he's like, because it's not like he's not, oh, to some degree, he is aware that he has a problem with kind of letting people walk on him. He's just a nice guy. Mm-hmm. And to see that, like, he has a power tie, like, he thinks of his tie. He's like, I'm going to wear this tie because it makes me feel powerful. That kind of stuff there in the beginning of the movie it's like really helpful in getting into his head and making him like immediately a sympathetic character, because to some degree you know that he understands his problem and that he actually proactively wants to change, and that's what makes it really understandable why he would kind of lean on the mask as a crutch later on in the movie. Mm-hmm. And also just like that moment right where when he is in the park with Cameron Diaz and he decides to go behind the bush and put on the mask, just if there's like that one little shot of Jim Carrey's face when he's walking away. And at this time, I'm not sure what serious roles had Jim Carrey been in at this time, because you can see like the seeds of like how he's going to be able to then later on in his career just flip over and do the more serious stuff, because he does have this weird ability to kind of like flips the script on his own performance every once in a while and just really pulls back and does some more like traditional style acting, and it's really cool that that's like visible in this movie already.
It's people are gonna call me crazy for this. I know they already have on Twitter as I've talked about it, but we've had a lot of really good dramatic actors play the Joker, and they've done varying levels of good jobs. I don't even hate everything about Jared Leto's performance. I think he was doing the best he had with what they gave him in the script to some degree.
I think
but
that's
I
true.
I really honestly want to see an actor who can do drama but has a background in comedy play the Joker. Mm-hmm. And now that we've got kind of an older DC universe, it's a real shame that we've cast Jared Leto, because I want Jim Carrey to play the Joker in a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for that. Like, I would be very interested to see that, because I feel like there are a lot of comedic actors, and I think Vince Gilligan, people know who Vince Gilligan is. He talks about how he has this like theory that like almost every comedic actor, or like most comedians can also play the polar opposite of a comedian in live action TV. He kind of just has this theory that you can take a comedian and they understand the reaction that an audience has to their performance. There's kind of this vague ability to read how people will respond to you that just translates well into really dramatic acting. And I think that absolutely, I would be interested to see Jim Carrey as the Joker.
Yeah, I mean, like, everyone would be, of course, worried that he'd play it like he did the Riddler in Batman Forever. And, like, I would want some level of that just complete over-the-top, all-encompassing energy, but I want the Joker to think he's funny. Mm-hmm. I really need that. Like, that's the thing I love the most about Mark Hamill and Jack Nicholson's performance. But neither of them, like Mark Hamill more so, but even then, it's really far in between where Mark Hamill's Joker got to be dramatic. And same with Jack Nicholson. He gets like one or two scenes as the Joker where he's actually being dramatic. I want the Joker that gets to go back and forth between those. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Jim Carrey's the guy who could do it. Yeah. But anyway, back to The Mask. So Stanley's the main character and obviously the most important character. I do love his opportunity to change, and it's not about rejecting the mask as that part of himself completely, because he, of course, uses it to save the day in the end. It's about embracing that side of himself and, kind of coming to balance. And you got all the Freudian levels to this movie, and, Ben Stein even talks about it, where he's like, there's the id and the ego and the superego, and that's what you see unfolding in this film really, really nice and subtly. They don't shove it in your face. You just see, okay, you got this guy who knows how he should act and knows the way society expects him to act and how that'll lead to, quote-unquote, a good life. But he's not satisfied with how he's being treated by people. So that's the superego, but he himself is not satisfied in the life he is living and how he's being treated by people. But at the same time, he doesn't want to just be a complete raving madman, but that's what the mask is the id. And so you have these three sides of him battling it out until he realizes that he can actively do what he wants to do in life, which is to, be a good person, but he can use his innate desires or whatever to help him in those goals. And so that's what the cabana scene is. And so then at the end he realizes he doesn't need the mask to live up to those kind of standards. He doesn't need to just be this raving lunatic. He can actually be a good person and not repress himself to death.
Yeah, I think it's weird. I think you can kind of use this movie as a template for how. This is really weird because we just got this news about the Venom movie, Tom Hardy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like obviously it should not be this movie, but you can use that kind of template for those kind of stories about the guy and then the other entity that merges with the person and then kind of brings out something. This movie kind of has a good template for how to work with that.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's just a lot about this that just functions on a really strong storytelling level. Plot-wise and main character arc-wise, this really is a solid flick.
Yeah.
You can't... Besides that one little scene with Cameron Diaz, I don't think there's really much of a plot hole in this movie.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
Okay, and then the other character that we've just kind of danced around but haven't talked about is Gideon. And Gideon is pretty much just all id, right? To go back to the Freudian stuff, Gideon does not change throughout this entire movie. He is given, the opportunity to leave town and, just put aside his desires or whatever, his need for power. And he doesn't do it, and he just keeps getting deeper and deeper and trying to go higher and higher up on the food chain. And it almost works for him, but the world comes crashing down on him by the end in the form of Stanley. And so I think that's a really interesting and pretty solid character arc for a villain. Is he's very much like Stanley. He kind of just, there's a part of him that wants it all. He's just he's on the opposite end of it. He's not repressed in any way, shape, or form, and that's his problem. And so when he gets the mask, he doesn't change. He just gets more powerful.
I think that the freaking the makeup when he has the mask on is really creepy to me.
Oh yeah,
it really bothers me. It's just one of those things where I just look at that and I just feel like, please take that off your face.
It's like he gets bigger. I don't know if they switched actors or what.
Yeah, I was like, is this even the same actor anymore? Because it's like they had to make a mask that kind of looks like a cartoon version of, or almost like an evil demon cartoon version of what his face looked like, but then they put it on another actor.
I don't know. It's hard to tell. And it's weird because when he yells, his eyes start to glow. I love that moment where Cameron Diaz asks for one last kiss, and Bob from Batman 89 says, "I don't have a way to shut the bomb off." And he goes, "Just give me a minute." And his eyes actually glow red and then go back to just being straight red. It's really interesting. Nice, really cool. It's not a subtle effect because they linger on it so you can see that, but they don't draw attention to it in any way, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
So Gideon, he has a complete character arc. It's just not a super complex one. So really, the only one with a really good character, with a truly complete character arc in this film, is Stanley Ipkiss. So I guess, again, the mitigating factor to the way that Cameron Diaz's character is kind of, thrown to the side as just serving the plot and serving Stanley's arc is just in that it's Stanley's movie and no one else's.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. Also kind of weird, it's got some of that superhero structure too, with like the cutting back. Like most of the time, if we ever cut away from Stanley, it's to the whole criminal underbelly element of this film. It's so that's like in a lot of ways, it's kind of structured like a superhero movie.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And it's got a lot of, like, you know, of the tropes or moments where it's, like, kind of nodding to the tropes. Like, when Cameron Diaz comes to see him in the bank, he's like, I know him, you know? We're friends, old college buddies. That's such, like, a Superman Clark Kent thing, right? Where it's like, oh, Lois, I could set up an interview with Superman if you want. That's something we've done in or Peter Parker Spider-Man's the better go-to, where like there have been entire, you know, stories in Spider-Man where people kidnap Peter Parker to get at Spider-Man, and that's always really funny. So like that is just dead off the page right there.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to set it up. It's just the only thing I can use to justify that scene is it is referencing other comic books.
Also, this movie, something we don't typically see in that many more comedically heavy films nowadays is like an actual pretty, like, it's one of those things where I'm watching this movie and when we get to like him discovering the mask and also the very intro of this movie where like the mask starts flowing up from the ocean, this movie has like a kind of, it's not a score that I can actually hum, but all of those, the theme of the mask, whenever it plays, I'm like, oh, I remember this. Yeah,
it's got like that kind of unnerving feel. It's not quite like as iconic as, you know, the Joker's you know, high pitch screech for The Dark Knight, but it's got that same kind of like just it starts to play and you know something's up.
Yeah.
And they do that several times. Like every time when he tries to throw the mask out the window and it boomerangs back to him.
Yeah, but that's a really cool shot.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like shot from under the mask, and I'm not sure how they did it, if it's like digitally composited or what, but it looked really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. It's got a lot of cool score in it. God, that fucking jazz soundtrack is amazing.
Yeah.
Oh. What's your favorite mask scene?
I think probably. I think actually the dance number when he leaves, when like all the cops have their guns pointed at him, and they
definitely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Cuban Pete's the best.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's like the moment where I always lose it when he does the magic fingers at the female officer and then she starts singing along. Is I just like the actress totally sells that, where she's, I can't tell if she's actually singing or not. I mean, it's probably obviously dubbed in, but whether she was actually singing on set, because she totally sells it where she's actually like, you know, perfectly mouthing all the words, but she has this look of confusion on her face.
Yeah.
That I just adore. It's like, he's the most modest guy, even though he's the hottest guy. And she's just like, what the fuck am I doing? And then you get to the end of the thing, and you get like a scene or two later, and you've got the detective characters like the whole SWAT team dancing the rumba in public. I'm gonna be a laughingstock. And his partner goes, well, they got an offer to open in Vegas. It's just so funny to me. Yeah, Cuban Pete's my favorite, man. Oh god, I love that scene. Oh, okay. I don't know, do we have anything else we want to talk about with this?
I don't think I have anything else left to say. One more thing. Was it you that I was talking with when... Oh, I think it was. We were talking about The Grinch and how Jim Carrey had to, like, do, like, torture training to, like, be able to wear all the makeup to play The Grinch.
Yep.
Apparently, like, it was really difficult for him to learn to speak with the giant teeth in this movie. And it's things like that where I have to give Jim Carrey props because he's like, there's actually like a level of commitment that you just typically wouldn't get out of a comedic actor today, and that's just like an example of it where like apparently it was like really difficult for him to learn to speak with those giant plastic teeth in his mouth, and I think that's just pretty
totally
cool.
Yeah, and like Jim Carrey is just a very committed actor, and in a way that like Adam Sandler can actually be a good actor when he wants to be. He's got a couple like legitimately good films where he's given a real performance, but he just doesn't care most of the time that he's on screen. You can just tell that he's there for a paycheck. So he's a comedic actor who just doesn't care and isn't willing to go like that extra mile. And then you got other actors who I think, you know, it's like a spectrum where you got actors who just clearly don't care and are there for a paycheck, like Adam Sandler on one side, and then you got Jim Carrey who will do anything for a role, like undergo torture training.
Yeah. He kind of reminds me of like the Tom Cruise of comedy, because like Tom Cruise is one of those actors where like he just wants to do everything himself, like stunt wise. Like he really takes pride in like doing as much of the stunt work as he possibly can himself, which is really cool. And I feel like Jim Carrey's kind of like that for comedy.
Yeah, totally. And not just comedy. He does a lot for his own for his more serious movies too. Like he got really into a lot of weird shit when he did Number 23. And you know, it's interesting to look into those guys who go really method that you wouldn't expect to. Like, have you ever seen the movie Unleashed with Jet Li?
I don't think so.
That's a movie worth talking about at some point. But Unleashed is like Jet Li did that movie and he refused to do another film for a year. He needed to give himself a year after that movie because of how deep he got into the character for that. And it's a really disturbing movie. Basically, the premise is that this crime boss steals a child and treats him like a dog his entire life with just a leash around his neck and trains him to think that if the leash is off, then he has to just destroy everybody in the room except his master. And so he's like trained as this bodyguard in that way. And it's just this really fucked up character. And Jet Li is, you know, you wouldn't expect that from a guy like Jet Li. He's like, okay, he does martial arts movies. He shows up on set and fights. But no, like he really got into a character for that. So that's an interesting movie. We can talk about that at some point. All right, yeah, let's go ahead and go on to ratings then. Rasco, what will you give The Mask?
I will give this 4 out of 5 muzzlers up the ass.
It's mufflers, not
mufflers.
muzzlers.
I'm sorry, not muzzlers. Mufflers up the ass.
Oh man, lightning back here. Lightning and thunder. Yeah, I agree. I think 4 out of 5 is the totally fair score, where it's got like really undeniably strong things, and then it has other stuff that's just like it's just a couple more minutes could have been spent on some things. So I'm gonna also give this 4 out of 5 spicy meatballs. So I hope everybody enjoyed that. Rasco, what are we going to be discussing next week?
I'm glad you asked, because I thought of it while we were doing this, and I'm really excited. I hope you haven't done this before. So can we do a list video on guilty pleasure movies?
Oh, totally. That sounds like a fun time.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Should be cool. Should be enjoyable. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Please join us next week for our top whatever guilty pleasure movies. Depend on how many people are here. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the beta male cook.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.